You might be a little too Baptist, but we'll talk about that.
Ich es pastorius, rotulorum et Jesu Christi. Welcome to Man Bones and Jesus, everybody. I'm one of your hosts, Josh Laborious. I'm currently a pastor out in Eastville, but this is now public information. I have taken a call to Friendswood, Texas, near Houston, Texas. So pretty soon I will be Joshua Laborious, pastor in Texas, and joined as always by my co-host, the great and wonderful magical Sasquatch, Ben Jiminelschlager. No, your recording didn't skip. I just had a really weird pause when I was saying his name. What are we talking about today, Ben?
So we are wrapping up our series on the Book of Concord by looking at what is possibly my favorite section titles, and it's just erroneous articles of other sects.
Which tells you exactly how confrontational Ben likes to be. What's your favorite section?
What other people get wrong.
And that right there is the most Lutheran thing about Ben.
It is. So we're going to take a look at over the next few weeks at a few of the random groups that Luther was dealing with in his day and age, and it might help kind of frame some thinking about what Luther was doing, who he was talking against, why he maybe phrases things the way he does in some cases, so that can't get mistaken for some of these other things that people might have accused him of being. And this week we're going to start with the Anabaptists, who are probably the closest thing we have to a precursor to modern Baptists. And a lot of their theology on stuff like baptism and coming to faith are in line with modern Baptist churches, but there's some other stuff in here that we might touch on that not as applicable, but we can still use this basis to speak to how we disagree.
Yeah, and I think there are two things I want to throw in with Ben's introduction here, just kind of to frame this conversation. The first is, I think it is worth acknowledging there is a distinction between the Anabaptists that Luther writes about and modern Baptists, because in many ways, and I guess I could be wrong on this because, as we'll talk about later, there's a lot of diversity within what is Baptist. In a lot of ways, Baptist is more of a New World denomination. Its most formative time has been in America since America's founding, and because of that, there is a lot of American cultural influence that has impacted how the Baptist Church has developed. And obviously, that hadn't happened when the Book of Concord was being written, right? And then the other thing that I think is worth mentioning is an acknowledgement that, as a general rule, it is better to define yourself by what you are instead of by what you are not. And we acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
However, and this is especially true at Luther's time, but it's still true today for reasons I'm sure we'll get into. If someone is confusing you for something else or someone else, at that point, it is very helpful to draw attention specifically to, we are not this because of XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say, well, how do Lutherans define yourself? You'll note we have over 30 episodes of This Is How We Define Ourselves. And we are now getting to an episode of This Is What We Are Not.
Yeah. And there are a few reasons that Luther includes this section in the Book of Concord. And a good chunk of it is that they kept getting accused of being parts of these different groups. And so they were just like, no, we're not this because we hate this, 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 and this, and this about this group of people. So yeah, we're definitely not that.
Right. And it's just like you don't want to be defined by the worst people that could possibly be affiliated with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like when if you're say you're a blues fan,
oh gosh.
you don't want me to paint you with the same brush as our former boss who made me hate the St. Louis Blues because he was so dumb and had such strong feelings that were also dumb about the St. Louis Blues, right? You don't want me to assume that you are dumb because you're a St. Louis Blues fan. So you say, well, there are some in this category, but we're not, and this is why we're different. It's the same thing. It's like, there are some problems with Christians, but those aren't necessarily our problems, and here's where we kind of draw a line.
Maybe even a better modern day example, because like in Luther's day, you were either Catholic or you were Protestant. Those were the two denominations. But then Protestants started to splinter pretty quickly within that. So there were Baptists, there were the quote unquote Reformed, which was more like Calvin's crew and Zwingli's crew. Zwingli was around pretty much the same time as Luther. Calvin was a little later. You had the Anglican branch that formed not too long after Luther either. And I feel like I'm missing one. I mean, you can count the Moravians, but their own weird thing. Anyway, so you had a handful of different groups in there that were all kind of off doing their own thing. And eventually you start to kind of need to distinguish yourself there. Kind of in the same way that, like, in today's day and age, there are probably at least 15 to 20 denominations within the United States that call themselves Lutheran. And people walk in
We're
and go,
not that Lutheran.
Yeah, exactly. People walk in and go, I thought you were Lutheran. I thought you did this. And I was like, no, that's a different branch of the Lutheran Church. We aren't aligned or affiliated with them in any way, shape, or form. This is what we believe on these things. And then people go, oh.
In fact, in a lot of cases, I think one of the Christian denominations that we are least similar to also call themselves Lutheran.
Yeah.
Like, I would say we probably have more differences with the ELCA than we do with, like, say, the Catholic Church or the Baptist Church, frankly.
Yeah.
I feel like we're probably closer to the Baptist Church than we are to the ELCA right now, so.
They still have high sacramentalism-ish.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Baptists.
Yeah. Before we default too much further. So,
flawless segue right there.
Thanks, Josh, for saving us. Luther lists 17 things that are wrong with Baptist teaching, and we're not going to go through every single one of them, but we're going to hit on the big ones. And each of these statements, as we read them, these are things that Luther found wrong with Baptist teaching. These are not things that we agree with.
Yes.
So hear that now. Remember that for later.
Well, and I think it might be helpful as we kind of approach these, at least I know I won't be able to help myself, is to immediately say, and here's why that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just getting started, the very first the first item listed is that our righteousness before God does not only depend on obedience and the merit of Christ, but on our renewal and godliness. And they base this on their own regulations and spirituality. And we say, no, that's incorrect. You're saved by the work of Christ alone.
By grace through faith.
Yeah, and this is something, when you say it, when you just say you're saved by grace through faith, I think a lot of modern day Baptists would not disagree with you. However, there is still an element of this. You have to earn it. You have to reflect it in your life in Baptist theology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you talk about backsliding, this is where that comes from.
Mm-hmm.
This whole, on some level, you have to earn it. And we say, no, on no level do you have to earn it. This is like the one thing I shouldn't say this. This is one of the things we get very nitpicky about. Don't want there to be any confusion after all.
Yeah. So, and that's one that still continues on in the Baptist church for sure. Because a lot of Baptist churches, not all, but a lot of Baptist churches will say they need to see a heart change or a life change in order to know that there's a heart change.
Yeah.
And we just say that's not true. The heart or the life change comes slowly. You don't just wake up knowing exactly what to do as a Christian. You learn that and are discipled in
Yeah.
that over time.
And even after you learn that, it takes a while for that to actually start impacting how you,
Mm-hmm.
like, just because you know the right answer doesn't mean you're automatically going to do the
Yeah.
right thing. So you
You
have
gotta
to learn
practice.
the answers, and then they'll start to apply themselves in your life.
Yeah, you have to practice. It's like when you're
It's
learning
like
how
you
to,
don't wake up one day and beat Roger Federer.
yeah, or it's, yeah, I'm sure you would have loved to do that, Josh. Um, I'm sure that
Not on my best day and not on his worst.
you should have gone with the more timely example. It's not like you're Roger Federer and you wake up one day and you can suddenly beat Rafael Nadal. That just never happened. Um,
See, I'm still bitter because I like Federer more than Nadal. But
that's
that's a
fine.
whole.
I do too, but there's still truth in that. Nadal owned him.
I still remember where I was the first time that Nadal beat him. I remember where I was watching the match. So,
Yeah.
not the point for today, though.
Anyway, yeah. So off off the bat, we start to see these differences that Luther's like, yeah, I'm not affiliated with this. This is just bad theology. This is another great one here. The second one, unbaptized children are not sinners in God's sight, but are instead innocent and righteous, and therefore in their innocence are saved without baptism, which they do not need. They thus deny and reject the entire teaching of original sin and everything connected with it.
Which, by this logic, you would be better off not telling anyone about Christianity ever because you're saved unless you know you're not saved, and then you can become saved. So if you just don't know that you're not saved, you will be saved. The logic here it's hurting my brain. And also, I will say I don't think this is very present in modern day Baptist teaching at all. I feel I tend to get more of a vibe of maybe a little heavy on the damnation to the unbaptized more than the universalist thread that is here. I guess I could be wrong, but that's the stereotype I have in my head is not the unbaptized are probably going to be fine. That's not the stereotype I have of
I
Baptist teaching.
I don't think that's necessarily where this is going. I think you're reading this as more universalist than it really is, because even in the Anabaptist world, like they would have believed that all the Lutherans in their day and age were going to hell, and that it was only those who had been baptized and joined their ranks, or children who died before the age of 7, because that's the age of reason, would go to heaven.
Yeah,
That's a pretty limited crew, but hey, it's full of babies,
that's true.
and
And they're
Baptists
cuter
are.
than the rest of us, so at least there's that.
Hmm?
Well, and this tailors into the next couple because you have 3 is child shouldn't be baptized until they attain the use of reason, which, first of all, wild that 7 is somehow a magic number for that. I have met grown adults who still can't use reason. So it's like,
Josh and I fail at that like 30% of the time.
right? I have 3 brain cells and 2 of them are busy mad at how bad the Preds are doing this season. So it's like, what do you want? And then the next thing is that the children of Christians, because they're born to believing parents, are God's children. They're holy with or without baptism. So they don't do infant baptism, which 3 and 4 are both kind of getting at this. We believe you should be baptized ASAP as possible. So this is a major distinction between us. Yeah, I don't know if we need it. If you need to hear more about that, I feel like we should just direct you to our episode on baptism. Unless you have something you want to add, Ben.
No, I think you've pretty much touched on it there. I still think we haven't said enough about how ridiculous it is to just pick a number and say, yeah, if they die before then, they're good.
Oh, yeah, it's wild. Anyway,
Yep.
continuing down the list, a congregation or assembly in which sinners are still found is not a true Christian congregation. So there are no true Christian congregations, is the response there. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you have a room with people in it, you have a room with sinners in it. Like, that's how this works.
Mm-hmm. This was one I encountered a few years back. I have a buddy who's a part of Youth with a Mission, which is an like interdenominational mission organization. And he was encountering some of this theology for the first time from some of the teaching that they were getting. And a guy came in and said, yeah, you can go a day without sinning. And I was like, Lutheran alarm bells went off immediately, right? Like, heck nah. You take a breath, you open your eyes, you scream some cuss
Boom,
words that
sin.
the sun's too bright, and then you're done for the day. Like, I got no shot. We will always find ways to sin. We will always find ways to be distracted, to even just momentarily hesitate longer than we are supposed to or longer than we should to do what God calls us to do. That's still sin. Like, you're
Well,
supposed
and even drilling down further than that, even if you're doing the right thing, but there's some hint of the wrong reason,
yeah, still sin.
boom, sin.
You're doing it for your own pride? Sin.
Straight to sin.
Straight to sin. No sin.
Undercooked chicken, overcooked chicken, also sin. Driving too slow, believe it or not, sin. Driving too fast, also sin.
Choosing
Here's a quote from a video I actually used in a sermon once.
the Fred Armisen as what is he? He's an emissary from what, Venezuela?
Something like that. Parks and Rec. Yeah.
That's a pretty good scene. Yeah.
It's a good one.
Yeah. All of this is it goes back to, it's an old quote and one that the president of our denomination likes to toss around a lot. The church is a place for sinners and hypocrites. What's one more? Like, that's the attitude we need to be having. This is a place for sinners, not a place for perfect people.
That's definitely closer to how Jesus did his ministry, right? It's
Yeah.
In fact, he got faulted on more than one occasion. Why does your teacher sit with sinners and tax collectors?
Yeah.
Um,
Got to meet the great David Zoll a couple weeks ago. Writer of Seculosity and other great literary works. Do you have the book on you? Is that what you're searching for? Never mind. One of his points in the way that he encourages churches to act is more like a Sinners Anonymous. So if you walk through the church doors and you go, "Hi, my name is Ben. I'm a sinner."
I'm a sinner.
That puts you in a
Yeah,
better
you are,
frame of
Ben.
mind than walking through the doors of your church and saying, "Hi, I'm Ben. I'm the pastor."
Now, your people might find it off-putting if that's how you started introducing yourself, unless you explained it, but
Yeah. I might do an entire summer worth of sermons on that. That might be fun.
No. So it kind of goes forward and it talks. There are a couple that I think they're less pressing issues than they used to be. It's no one should attend or hear a sermon in a house of worship where masses were previously recited. It's like, I don't know if people would die on this hill, but it's probably less common now that we're not like immediately in the aftermath of a Reformation. It isn't very often that churches hermit crab their way into a Catholic cathedral, and that's now where they're worshiping. I'm sure it happens, but not. I wouldn't imagine very often. And the next one is essentially no one should have anything to do with ministers of the church who preach the gospel according to the Augsburg Confession and condemn the errors of the Anabaptists. This is a weird inclusion for me. Like, you shouldn't have to include in your confessional document that you disagree with people who disagree with your confessional document. This feels like just a petty, I want to make sure I have more reasons kind of thing. Or I guess this might have been written before it was collected into one document, so maybe I should be more gracious with my eye rolling, but
I
that
mean,
doesn't sound like me.
what they're saying though is like we disagree that this kind of association should be outlawed. I guess if somebody's calling you a perverter of the word because of your association with something, I don't mind pushing back against that in specific language.
Yeah, I suppose you're right.
Like some of our
The next
friends.
several are something we
Before you
talked
scoot to
about.
that,
Oh, okay.
some of our friends
Go
at
for it.
1517 are enjoying the fact that they got called a heterodox mission and tract society at the most recent synod convention. Did you hear about that?
Which is wild to me. That is a crazy, crazy
Okay,
statement to
so
make.
for some context here, 1517 is an organization started by mostly profs at Concordia Irvine, which LCMS institution, and their goal is to uphold faithful law gospel teaching. And so some of the people they invite in to write, they write about law gospel stuff, but they aren't necessarily LCMS Lutheran. And 1517's like, yeah, this is okay, because they're focusing on stuff on which we agree. And they're not touching
Right.
on the stuff on
They're
which we disagree.
writing about stuff we're on the same page about. It's not like they're writing about the diverging places.
Yeah, and some of the places these people have been asked to, or some of the things these people have been asked to write about, they've written about 4 publications within the synod that have gone through doctrinal review. So, like, it's not like we don't trust them to talk about these things. We generally do. Anyway, so one of them got a shirt. One of the guys from 1517 got a shirt that just says Heterodox Mission and Tract Society. Or, sorry, I think his shirt says Orthodox Mission and Tract Society.
Yeah, that'll probably get him in less trouble.
Yeah. Anyway.
People need more to do.
People need to actually just
stupid stuff.
People need to do
we got bigger fish to fry, ladies and gentlemen. Calm down.
Yeah, people need to do the things that God encourages them to do, not complain as much as we can.
Yeah. If you have enough time to complain about that, go spend some more time. Help a soup kitchen out or something. I don't know.
Go make more disciples.
Yeah. The next several, so 8, 9, 10, and 11, and 12, all kind of revolve around this idea that you can faithfully engage with government if you're a Christian, whether that is working for it, being a part of it, and like all that, swearing oaths. You can engage on these things and still be a faithful Christian, which we did an episode on because this is a topic that comes up elsewhere. I don't know in practice how much of this is still part of the Baptist tradition. I'm sure there are still churches that kind of push it, but like, I don't know that there are Baptists out there who are really like pushing, you can't be a Christian in government, you shouldn't vote, like that kind of stuff. There are still some. I don't know if that is a dominant thread, at least in my experience and in what I've been exposed to.
This kind of
one
theology...
exception, the whole, what is it? Actually, no. I don't think any of these. Yeah. And I mean, I grew up in Baptist country, right? I grew up in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't hear a lot of the, you shouldn't be involved with the government, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I think this kind of theology lives on less in like Baptist, like strictly Baptist traditions, and more in like Mennonite and Amish traditions.
That, yeah.
Which also spring from this. And honestly, the Mennonite and Amish traditions, or the early Anabaptists, looked a lot more like Mennonite and Amish traditions than they do modern
fantastic
Baptists.
Beards.
I think one of them shaves. I don't remember. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah. The next one, Christian may not, with a good conscience, own or possess private property, but has to surrender all to the community. Again, you maybe see some of that in groups like the Mennonites or the Amish, although I don't even know how much that is true anymore either. You do not see a lot of this. In fact, when this stuff starts to happen in this country, we start saying, that smells a little bit like a cult.
Mm-hmm. Because usually it is.
That a Christian may not... Go ahead.
I was just going to say usually it is. If that starts happening, it usually is.
The church owns all the property and you just live on it. It's like, I mean, I suppose that could be faithful and normal. I don't know that I've ever seen it, but it theoretically. Continuing down these lists, number 14, that a Christian may not be, in good conscience, be an innkeeper, a merchant, or a weapons maker. I feel like when you take out merchant, like what are Christians supposed to do?
So I think one thing that we should probably, or I should note for context here, merchant in that day and time meant not necessarily someone who like made and sold their own goods, but who bought and sold other people's goods. So basically, you shouldn't go around buying people's stuff, marking it up, and then selling it.
Okay.
But that, I mean, basically that means you can't work for Target, Meijer, Walmart, Amazon, like,
Yeah, I was about to say, basically, if you're, I mean, you can do business with Etsy, I guess.
yep, Facebook
Uh,
Marketplace.
yeah, yeah.
You can start your own
Um,
shop.
that's pretty much. I mean, and here's the thing: in that shop small, sure, cut out middlemen. I'm not opposed to that, but it's like it's a weird quote unquote theological mandate to try and make.
Yeah. The
Uh,
the the innkeeper one's the one that confuses me. I don't know that one for sure.
yeah, I don't know.
Like weapons maker, I can also get. I think this group was predominantly pacifist. Um,
Yeah, earlier it is that the government shouldn't impose capital punishment. That's another one of these complaints against the Anabaptists is that that's something they're holding to because in Lutheran theology we say the government has been given the sword.
yep.
Uh, are we good to continue?
Yeah. Go ahead.
The next one is just that married people may divorce and abandon the marriage partner because of differences in faith and then marry someone who shares the same faith. I believe this is referring largely to your different denominations. Because I think there is some biblical precedent for like if your partner is a non-believer and they want a divorce, like Paul writes essentially don't like you can't hold them to the standards of the faith. It doesn't give you as a Christian the freedom to initiate a divorce, but it kind of acknowledges this reality that like if you're married to a non-believer, they're not going to have this same value as you regarding divorce. So they might initiate a divorce. And what Paul's essentially saying is you don't have to carry the burden of that because they initiated it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And
Um,
not everybody that you marry, like if one of the two becomes Christian, not everybody is gonna be on board with that
yeah.
transition or follow you in it. So understand that
Yeah.
that's tough.
And then 16 and 17 are Christological heresies. It's that Christ did not receive his flesh and blood from the Virgin Mary, but brought it with him. I mean, like in a suitcase or something, I guess. And then Christ is not true God, but merely has more and higher gifts and glory. And we're like, no, Jesus was God, and he had flesh. He was really born of Mary. So,
Mm-hmm.
which that's another one. I don't know. I don't know how often that
Yeah.
particular bad teaching has survived.
Yeah. I like this last line, and I don't know. I think you're probably ready for this, but I like this
Yeah, go
last
for it.
line because it's also kind of indicative of the modern Baptist church. Luther writes in the last line, the they hold other similar articles, but they are divided among themselves into many factions, with one group holding more errors and another fewer. Thus, the entire sect is basically nothing else than new monasticism. So basically, uh, these groups can't agree on what all is important or is correct, and they all have different rules about things. So basically, what breaks out is a bunch of monasteries. places where they all have their own individual rules and ways of life, and they just can't agree on that. And that very much feels like what we see in a lot of the modern Baptist church. Most of their denominations are loose affiliations where you can hold pretty varying theological stances on things and still be in fellowship. So it's hard to kind of pin Baptist theology down. You can do it in kind of broad strokes, but you can't get 100% of the way there.
Yeah.
But
And I think that is something important to acknowledge. Like, especially in America, Baptists are very their organization, their affiliation as a larger body is fairly loose. So anything that we've said, if you're sitting listening to this and you're saying, "Well, I'm a Baptist or I know a Baptist and they don't believe this," it's like, yeah, we get it. There is a lot of diversity within, especially within the American Baptist Church. And some of these, just like Ben was reading, just like Luther said, some of these problems apply, some of them might not. And like that's fine. We're not trying to say that all Baptists believe this. What we're saying is historically this is where the Anabaptists were, and that some Baptist churches today still hold to some of these things. So that's kind of a disclaimer here. I mean, just like with a lot of things, like it depends on what church you go to. It depends on who your pastor is. Um, that's one thing. And if you're listening to this and you've been LCMS Lutheran your whole life, you need to understand the uniformity we have in our teaching is a huge outlier. There are few church bodies, if any, that are more consistent across the board than the LCMS is. And a big part of that is because we train all of our pastors they go through one of two schools. And when everyone is learning their theology from the same place, it's going to be remarkably consistent when it comes out the other side. So there's kind of our asterisk on that. Do you think we're ready for takeaways, Ben?
I'll throw one more thing out there. I mentioned at the beginning in our cold open that you might be a little too Baptist. As we go through this, or as we've gone through this list, there are a few themes that arrive from this list into modern day Baptists that have very much permeated kind of popular Christian American culture. Especially stuff around reason and freedom and your personal role in your faith. It's worth kind of acknowledging that existence in the way that a lot of Americans talk about their faith and talk about Christianity. And Luther starts to address a lot of these things early on. So as Lutherans, if you're listening to this podcast as a Lutheran, we need to be conscious of those things as we engage with Christian media, because love our brothers and sisters that are Baptist, but they're producing a lot of this stuff, and it's going to come from their bent. And that means we need to be aware of that. And we need to know how to address that and even use some of the stuff that they make, which is often really good. Just using it wisely. So, back to you, Josh. I can't hear anything you're saying. I think you muted yourself. That's embarrassing.
Yes, because my dog was getting ready to act a fool, so I was preemptive there. I think the takeaway I would just encourage you from this is just have an awareness of, and this is probably going to be my takeaway for the next couple episodes, just kind of have an awareness of the different teachings that are out there, especially because as you engage with Christian things, whether it's books or media or even just conversations with other Christians, it's worth kind of knowing where some of the, I don't want to say mistakes, but I'm going to say mistakes are out there, just so you can kind of be aware, hey, this is somewhere where I'm going to have to watch out.
Mm-hmm.
Or this is something that as I'm reading from this author, this might be a mistake they're prone to make, so I need to be careful around that time. So just have an awareness of what is out there outside of your own church and your own church body.
It's good. I think my takeaway from this is it's worth acknowledging that we have theological neighbors that we love, people who do great things and write great things and give good sermons. But we don't want to neglect that there are distinctions between us, because we want to work toward unity. And to just kind of like paint over the cracks doesn't do us any favors, right? I'm thinking about, I saw a picture earlier today from the local news channel of a reporter standing in a pothole up to his waist, and now I have the picture in my head of just painting over a pothole like that. First car that drives over that's not going to be very happy with the road crew if they're just trying to paint over a pothole, right? That's not going to end well. So let's not try and do that when it comes to our theological differences. Let's acknowledge those differences, but then let's work toward unity.
Yeah. So with that, brothers and sisters, go in peace. Serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
This has been a presentation of Man Buns and Jesus, bringing you into conversations to deepen your faith and your understanding. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to reach out in the comments on Spotify or YouTube, or message us on our Facebook page. Before you leave, make sure to rate the podcast, subscribe to keep up to date on new content, and share with a friend.